Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth video in this series on retirement planning. As you will recall, there have been 3 previous videos on this topic. So the first video dealt with the Social Security system. And the Social Security system merits its own video because it's a component of every American's retirement. The second video was on the overall financial plan and how to meld Social Security with other kinds of savings plans in order to reach that threshold of savings that will allow you to sustain a particular standard of living into your retirement years. The last video we talked about managing an IRA or a 401k plan. We talked about pre-tax and post-tax, and again the conversation also included how to meld the IRA and 401k with the Social Security system and to reach the threshold necessary to, again, sustain a certain standard of living. This video is about consumer debt and managing consumer debt throughout a lifetime and the impact of consumer debt on the retirement plan. So let's do something fun to start with. There is currently a total of about $13 trillion in consumer debt. Now I'm going to list off the 4 biggest chunks of that, and you see if you can put them in rank order in terms of which is the highest amount down to which is the lowest amount. Here they are: credit card debt, home mortgage debt, auto loan debt, and school debt. Now, while you're working on that exercise, or just press pause if that helps you, that's fine. But while you're working on that exercise, let me continue on. Debt is neither good nor bad. So debt is neither a hero nor a foe for that matter. Debt can be used for various positive reasons. Debt can also get you in trouble. I do want to talk a little bit about what distinguishes good debt from bad debt. So the easiest way to comprehend debt is that it is the antithesis of savings. By that I simply mean this: when we borrow money today, what we are doing is we're borrowing our living standard from the future to subsidize our living standard in the present. So for instance, if we borrow money to buy a car today, we enjoy that car today, so it affects our standard of living today. But it's our future self that pays off the note on that car. The same thing is true when we buy a house or we purchase education or whatever it is. Whenever we use debt today, we're borrowing from our future standard of living to subsidize our current standard of living. Savings is the opposite. When we put money from our earnings today into a savings plan, we're making a deliberate decision not to use those to consume or support our consumption habits. Those dollars are being put away. So our current self is subsidizing our future self. So rather than using the money to support our current standard of living, we're using money to support our future standard of living. So then in a nutshell, debt is borrowing from your future self, saving is investing in your future self. And that's the basic distinction. Neither of these is necessarily always good, neither is always evil. There's purposeful reasons to use debt, and obviously there are purposeful reasons to save. Okay, what are the good reasons for using debt? Well, one of the primary reasons we might use debt is because it will allow our future standard of living to be higher than it otherwise would be absent that debt. So the best rationale I can find for that line of reasoning would be to get an education. So if we're able to pursue a college education, for example, because we're able to borrow, then the likelihood is our future earnings would be higher than they otherwise would be absent the education. And that debt may be fully justified for that rationale. Similarly, a house may justify a home mortgage. I think the rationale here is weaker than it is for assuming educational debt in order to improve your future standard of living. But there is a positive rationale associated with the likelihood that the home can grow in value over time. And so it's not just a place to live, but it's also a way to accumulate net worth. How about auto loans and credit card debt? Those are the other two big buckets I mentioned earlier. So let's deal with credit card debt first. Credit card debt is the most onerous and least productive form of debt. It has the highest interest rates, and it's often used for the most unjustifiable reasons. So when we shop for Christmas, or when we go out for a lavish meal, or when we take a trip and we don't have the cash to pay for it, and we finance that with a credit card, that's borrowing from our future self for that consumer experience today, and it's hard to rationalize that trade-off. Auto loans are a little bit different. We need autos to get to and from work. We need autos to be an American. However, the amount we need to spend on the auto probably dictates some judgment, and we can easily overspend and therefore overborrow as a consumer in purchasing automobiles. All right, so have you put your mind to the exercise? All right, so let's review the answers. Of that $13 trillion of debt, of that $13 trillion of national consumer debt, by far the biggest chunk is for the home mortgage loans. That's $9 trillion. So that's by far the lion's share. And it makes sense because homes are very expensive, and it's very difficult for for nearly any American family to buy adequate housing without borrowing. So that's wholly not surprising. Student loans is the second on that list. It's way down in terms of dollars, but it's second highest on the list. Student loans, again, I think consuming education wisely, if it takes borrowing to do that, is a good rationale for debt because it raises the standard of living for your future self. It's not as clear whether buying housing or buying an automobile, for example, or certainly buying a steak dinner, it's not as clear that those things do anything or anything as significant as education to raise the standard of living for your future self. What's number 2, or 3 rather? Auto loans is number 3 and credit card debt is number 4. All of those are in aggregate over $1 trillion each. So each of those 4 big buckets is indeed a big bucket. Now I want to talk about one more rationale about managing debt. In managing debt, the fundamental principle is to match the duration of the debt to that thing you're buying with the debt. So, for instance, if we're buying a home, it may be appropriate to have a 30-year mortgage because the life of the home is at least as long as the life of the mortgage, 30 years. An educational loan is likely very shorter than the life of the educational benefit. So if the payback on the student loan is 10 years, the payback on the educational benefit is probably more like a lifetime. Again, you see the logic on the auto loan for 60 months or 72 months. The length of the loan kind of matches the life of the asset. Try to make this logic with a credit card debt, and you just really can't. So if you're buying clothes, or you're buying gasoline, or you're buying a meal out, there is no duration. You're consuming that as you buy it, and it has an instant expiration. So there is no point, there is no economic rationale for carrying credit card debt from month to month. I'm not making the case that you can't use a credit card. You obviously can use a credit card. What I'm making a case against is not paying that credit card off at the end of each month. Because when you carry a balance forward in a credit card, you're using that credit card debt to finance a lifestyle rather than paying for it out of your earnings. So once again, the most cogent part of this argument is simply this. Anytime we use debt, and for whatever reason we use debt, we are borrowing from our future selves in order to sustain a certain level of or certain standard of living today. The opposite, savings, is borrowing from our current self to support our future self. And these two things interact. So the more that we have borrowed in the past, the more we are crowding out of our budget the ability to put away savings. So a budget has so many dollars in it. And if the repayment of debt consumes too much of that current budget, then there will be no money left over for which you may put money into a savings vehicle. So the competition between dollars for debt and dollars for savings is always there. One last time, I'd like to refer to a report from the General Accounting Office. And this report is about people lining up to retire, people in my generation, 55 and over. And people in this generation, so again, Americans 55 and over, 52% have no retirement savings. 52% have no retirement savings. That's inexcusable. You know, I'll bet you if we looked at those 52%, there's a ton of debt that they have in their lives, and it's crowded out the opportunity to save. So all this distills down to a simple a lesson. We have to live within our means. Well, whatever age we're at, we have to live within our means. And borrowing today means that our standard of living will be lower in the future than it otherwise would be. And it also means that we'll have lower savings than we otherwise would have because our future earnings will be prepaying the debt instead of being set aside for investment. So I hope you've enjoyed these 4 videos. As far as I'm concerned, this is the end of it. But I hope you found it useful, and I hope it's been informative. Thanks for listening.